right, welcome back to another episode of Phoenix Edge. This is an RPG and gaming news podcast. My name is Hat.
And I'm Hian, and I'm the guest speaker for today.
Damn right. So Stan was actually not able to join us for this episode, but he'll be back next week. And as I've already explained, Eric is busy with his newborn baby, but he'll be back in about a month or so. So joining me today is Hian, and we are going to be talking about the Final Fantasy Pixel Remaster that's been released. We're going to be giving our impressions on that. Without further ado, let's get into Final Fantasy Pixel Remaster. This game, or this collection of games, is basically supposed to be Final Fantasy 1 through 6, the remakes of the original games in a more retro pixel art style. Right now, we have Final Fantasy 1 through 3 that has been released, and then Final Fantasy 4 through 6 are going to be coming out later in the year. And the cost for this is $11.99 for Final Fantasy 1 and $11.99 for Final Fantasy 2 and $17.99 for Final Fantasy 3, or you can pay $74.99 for the entire Final Fantasy 1 through 6, and you'll get 4 through 6 later in the year when they come out. For that price, you're getting visual upgrades, obviously, from the original NES version, rebalancing, so lower cost for shop items, more monster drops, tweaks to enemy HP, that type of thing. Quick save, on-screen map, which can be turned off. Remastered soundtrack done by Nobuo himself. The first official 2D version of FF3 in the West. And then we got lame stuff like a bestiary, and then a speed up feature in battle, and then an auto battle feature as well. Probably the biggest thing that I've seen people complain about is the font, which has been quickly modded within like a day of release. Most people have downloaded that mod now and have gotten a more pleasing font. We'll get a little bit into that. And then the additional dungeons and the other remakes, those are not in this game. It's just literally the original game remade and enhanced. So that's a basic rundown of what's in the game. Let's go ahead and get into our overall thoughts. I've only been able to play Final Fantasy 1 for a couple of hours. I've seen a lot of different footage and discussion on Final Fantasy 2 and 3. But Hian, I know you also picked up the Pixel Remasters and you've been able to play a few hours of each. Obviously, you've beaten the games and such many times in the past. So what did you think about these Pixel Remasters?
It's kind of a tough question, right, I suppose, because I emulate games, and I'm probably always going to emulate games because I have sort of the know-how for how to do that and get around things. And I enjoy kind of being able to play all these classics on my phone via emulation. And so I've never really cared much for remasters or remakes and stuff like that. It's just not, it doesn't matter to me. But sure, there are a couple of points about sort of the pixel art where I'm like, maybe it could have been a little bit better in some places. But then there are other places where it's like, this is pretty good, right? The backgrounds, the battle backgrounds and the towns and everything, it's pretty decently done. Usually I have a little bit of a gripe with some of the sprites, right? Where I think some of the coloration there is a bit flat. It lacks a little bit of the shading is a bit off or like lacking. But that's just sort of the characters, like the enemy sprites, the backgrounds for the battles, the towns and everything else looks super good. And the soundtracks are amazing. And I'm a music guy. So when the soundtracks are good, like as I said before this soundtrack, I can eat a lot of shit if the soundtracks are good for a game, right? I can play a really bad game and still be on board for it for a while if the soundtrack is really good. But when it comes down to the conversation on price, I don't know. I honestly, I just couldn't tell you. I don't have a super strong opinion on it because on one hand, I'm like, these are these old games. Maybe you could sell them for a couple of bucks, right? But it's not cheap to hire musicians. I can tell you this as a person who produces music. Like, music is expensive, and remastering these soundtracks, buy them, like, that is probably the most expensive part of this package, the freaking music, to be honest.
Well, and Nobuo was involved in that too, so I'm sure that was not the cheapest option.
Well, Nobuo is a pretty stand-up guy. I don't know how much. It's complicated. I've already seen people bitching about this on Twitter, where there's some people like everybody's saying it's Nobuo who did it, but there are all these other artists that are credited and blah blah blah, and like you need to give credit where it's due, and it's not Nobuo and stuff like that. But Uematsu was he appeared for a Famitsu interview a couple of weeks or a week or two back, and the way that he was talking, because that interview was like 30 or 40 minutes. And the way that he was talking throughout that interview made it pretty clear, at least to me, that he was fairly intimately involved with this. So obviously there were other artists and arrangers who kind of did the heavy lifting, but they were doing it under his supervision, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a big part of why the soundtrack ended up the way that it did. But whether or not sort of his involvement had a big price tag or not, that I don't know, because Uematsu, he's a pretty lax type of dude. You know, he cares a lot about the music that's been used in Final Fantasy over the years, and
it's his music too. So I guess he probably has a certain kinship to it that would make it a little different.
Yeah, I don't think it's like, I don't think Square Enix are going to send an email to Uematsu where they're like, please help us with this music, and then Uematsu is going to be, well, if you pay me $1 million, I might do it, right? It doesn't seem like that type of guy, right? So he's probably going to be like, well, great, that sounds like a lot of fun, right? Let's do it.
Nobuo's done interviews in the past where he said, okay, Final Fantasy IX was the last game where, okay, he's done other full soundtracks before, but Final Fantasy IX, he did the entire soundtrack and he felt just exhausted after doing that all by himself. And then when we go to Final Fantasy X, he started just managing a team of people and outsourcing some of the smaller tracks and things like that. So the fact that, you know, he's redoing 6 games soundtrack, the idea that this guy who's talking about how he's having health issues is going to be remixing 6 full-length RPGs all by himself. I fully expected him to be kind of in a leadership position on this. So I guess I agree with you, but I also can see the point where people are saying, okay, maybe this is some newer composer's big break, that they're adding their own flair to it, and Nobuo's kind of managing that, and maybe they should get credit too, but it's Nobuo's music. So, you know, it's not like it's a brand new game. Regardless of that, I mean, these remixes of these songs are so good. I mean, they bring so much to the replay value of these games that even with the things that you brought up with the artwork, I mean, and I'm with you. Like, I think like the towns, the environments, the battle backgrounds, the spell effects, they all look great. I think they look fantastic. They are very vibrant.
Yeah, they do.
But I do agree that the character sprites are a little bland and could be a little bit better. Despite that, I think what really brings us to life is that remixed music. That's what makes us feel special, I think.
Yeah, I have to say that when I was playing Final Fantasy 3 and you get onto the world map and everybody knows this track, right? But so when it starts playing, you know, it's almost, you can almost kind of, I think I'm sweating a bit from my eyes here, because like, dude, this is so good. Or even Final Fantasy 1, when you hit the bridge, right, and you get the titular theme, and it's just like, dude, this is it. This is it, right? This is Final Fantasy, man. And it's funny, right? Because right now Square Enix are making it has the long, complicated name, because of course it does, the Final Fantasy 1 kind of reimagined the team.
Oh, Strangers in Paradise. Yeah.
Strangers in Paradise or whatever, right? And I don't know, like, I feel as if that was handled properly, at some point in that trailer, you would have 4 people on a bridge and you would have that theme like kick in. And then everybody would be like, it's fucking Final Fantasy 1, and everybody would be totally on board with it. But it's just some kind of like generic movie soundtrack music in the background, and you have all the generic characters, and it's just like going back to these old Final Fantasies and then having that music just wash over you. And there is something special about that. And so, sure, could they have done more with these? Could they have done more to kind of warrant the price and everything else? I'm sure they could. But I have to be honest, when I fired up Final Fantasy 1 of like the pixel remasters, it was enough to actually make me feel like I was playing Final Fantasy 1 for the first time. And that was, that in and of itself has some level of value to it, I suppose. In the long history of Square Enix of just not doing things right, these pixel remasters are at least a step in the right direction.
Well, I was just going to say, compared to some of the stuff they've been releasing lately too, when we look at the abomination of the Final Fantasy VI remake on Steam, that is just one of the hideous looking art styles I've ever seen, replacing one of the best art styles I've ever seen for pixel art. It's just baffling. So compared to that, this is exceptional.
Yeah.
And then when you look at I don't know if you saw it, but they remade Dragon Quest 1 through 3 again on the Switch. I don't know if you saw the art style for that, but it's kind of got that similar HD effect to it. It's not very good. And so when I'm looking at this, I'm like, yes, this is good. You should keep doing this. I'm not happy with the bland looking characters sprites, but outside of that, with the mix of this music, I can't imagine playing a different version. But I'm with you, man. That price, that's really the kicker. $17.99 for Final Fantasy 3. I mean, that's only going to appeal to Final Fantasy fans. I mean, I can't imagine somebody paying that much for Final Fantasy 3 2D version. I would have thought $7.99 would have been more appropriate.
Yeah. Here in Japan, on because I bought them on my Android, right?
Mm-hmm.
And on Android, if you buy them, that's like 1,500 yen ish for like one of those titles. If it had been 999 yen or something, I can imagine people who maybe haven't played Final Fantasy before would look at that and maybe try to purchase it. The fact of the matter is that I've worked in education here in Japan, and I still do occasionally just to get a little bit of on the side money. Kids here in Japan play a lot of mobile games, right? And so you'd think that, wow, this is like a good chance to give them a taste of old school Final Fantasy and stuff like that. But these people are not buying games on mobile phones for over 1,000 yen. That's just not happening. That's not their allowances, and with the competition being all these free-to-play games and shit like that, it's just not happening. It doesn't seem to be the smartest price to put on these titles. And I feel as if Square Enix could afford to lower the price a little bit more. And I think that would actually be recuperated in additional sales. And so it just seems very old school, stubborn Square Enix, kind of WADA period Square Enix, where some moron at the top is sitting there thinking, but they can afford it, right? Square Enix is a strong brand. They're going to buy it, right? And it feels a bit exploitative, whereas, you could sell this for 990 yen, 600 yen cheaper, and you would sell more copies. You would make it up, no problem. But because you're Square Enix, you're just kind of sitting there on your hands and going, well, they're going to buy it because they love Final Fantasy. Final Fantasy said, it's a strong brand. And when I see that, it kind of makes me not want to fucking buy it just to piss them off. Where it's like, okay, if that's how you're going to be, then I'm not going to buy it. Fuck off, right?
Right.
Yeah. So I kind of get it that there are fans out there who are upset about that, who are a bit. Who just go, no, Square Enix, I've had enough. Like, stop it. And
I'm not gonna lie, I was looking at covering this on this podcast, and I was like, okay, I need to go buy the game, and I didn't know the price, and I thought, okay, like it's probably gonna be like $5 a game or something, and I get on there, and I'm like $75 for 1 through 6. I was just like, Jesus, that's quite the commitment. But I looked at the price of them individually. And I was like, okay, it's cheaper to get all of them, I guess. But if Final Fantasy 3 is $17.99, when Final Fantasy 4 through 6 come out, I mean, how much is Final Fantasy 6 going to cost? Do you think it's going to be $35 or something along those lines?
That would kill me. Like, if Final Fantasy 6 is more expensive than the rest of them, that's because, I don't know. Like, Final Fantasy 6 is the one in that collection that interests me the most, because I want to hear what that soundtrack's going to sound like when when you're marching into March. No pun intended.
Or the opera scene, or dancing. Yeah, it's just going to be fantastic.
Dude, that is everything. I'm looking forward to that so much. If they're gonna, this is gonna be $30 for this one. Square Enix, you're done. You're gone.
I'll do it. I mean,
I'll just download the freaking soundtrack and, like, I don't know, mod it into my PlayStation version or something.
Yeah, it's possible. Yeah. The thing with the name of the game is it's not new, right? Final Fantasy 1 through 2, we've had other pixel remasters, so they're really leaning on this being more of a retro style pixel art. And I guess I kind of missed that when it was originally announced at E3. You were there for our stream. We were streaming that Square Enix presentation for E3. And
oh no,
I don't know. I just got such a negative feeling from this announcement because that presentation overall was just horrific. So I just immediately had very bad feelings about this pixel remaster because it was just mixed in with a bunch of just garbage that I didn't want to play. And so I was pleasantly surprised when it was much better than I thought it was going to be.
Yeah, like the Android version, I was surprised it has like the finger tracking thing where you can kind of create what's the name for it, like not a walk path or like pathfinding. That's the word. It has like a pathfinding function where you trace a path with your finger and then the character moves that path. So it's like they put a little bit of work into this, obviously, because like. Yeah, and it even looks good. Like the UI element, when you like trace with your finger, there's like this little square, Final Fantasy Tactics style. There's this little square, and then there's like the arrow, and then there's another square for your destination. And those little touches, they're not a super big deal from a development perspective or a cost perspective, but they couldn't even be bothered to do that for the other Android ports, right? So. Obviously, I don't want to. I don't look at these and think of them as lazy cash grabs. I know that there's some people who kind of characterize it as that. I was kind of disappointed to see some of the. Yeah, there are some of the YouTubers that I follow, and I was kind of watching their coverage of the games, and words like lazy and stuff like that popped up. But definitely, I don't think these remasters fall into that category because I sense a lot of love for that. They got the original sprite artist back to kind of work on it, and you can have judgments of those sprites where it's like you don't like them. I don't like them a whole lot either. But obviously, like if this was just a cheap like port, they wouldn't have gone back to the source together to redo the sprites, right? They wouldn't have gone to Sakaguchi to get not Sakaguchi, but Uematsu to like get his pointers on the soundtrack.
Sure.
And, they wouldn't have done these like small things for UI and controls and sort of quality of life stuff for the Android ports and everything. So I sense a whole lot more love poured into these remasters than anything I've ever sensed from any of the other ports, and that includes stuff like Final Fantasy 8, Final Fantasy 7, Final Fantasy 9.
Oh yeah,
like those ports are trash. Like honestly, on so many levels, they could have done so much more for those ports. And I was talking to Mike from Resident Arc the other day about this as well, where it's like. The thing that jades me the most right now is that we're going to get Final Fantasy 1 through 6 with this music. But I'm sitting here like, what about Final Fantasy 7 through 9, man? Where are those? Like, come on. Where are those soundtracks? Those are the best soundtracks. You have to remaster those, right? And that's just probably not going to happen, right?
They have to be thinking about it.
Dude,
well,
but they're not, right? Because they have the remake, and then they have the Final Fantasy 7, like the mobile thing that's going to be all the compilation and stuff like that, right?
Yeah, but think about it. Though.
I just want.
But think about it, though. I mean, okay, they remaster these games every generation, 7 through 10, and now that they've added 12 into the mix. And my God, Final Fantasy 10 in particular. Okay, it came out in the PS3. They slightly updated it to PS4. Well, I don't think they can do that now with PS5 because you have that backwards compatibility. It's going to be like, what's the point? You're going to have to do something different. For those, I think I would be a little bit more concerned that they're going to mess it up because we already saw with the Pixel remaster for Final Fantasy VI, they showed off some screens and stuff. We saw that early scene of Final Fantasy VI, the early opening where you have Terra and the soldiers looking off the cliff to the left. And they're like, oh, there's the city over there. And they went and redid the background underneath the cliff to make it look like a city instead of like mines. So it looks like the soldiers are looking the opposite direction of the city and saying, there's the city. Changes like that irk me because I think that was already possible on the Super Nintendo. That wasn't a limitation for them to make that a city if they wanted to. So I like Final Fantasy 1 through 3's changes because this is, the sound chip on the NES sucked. The color palette was kind of poor. So these are all changes where it's like, okay, this was a limitation of the hardware. But I think that would be my big concern with some of the later games if they go back and update it more, is they're going to start jacking with stuff they don't need to jack with.
Yeah, and there's just kind of the I guess, depending on whether you see it, whether you see it as a problem or not is probably very individual, right? But for instance, the Final Fantasy 7, not the 7, the 8 remaster, right? They redid the 3D models for the characters, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it's not consistent, right? Because I don't think they did it for all the NPCs and stuff. So you get this weird kind of mismatch between sort of the HD models for the main cast, and then you get like just kind of a rush job on the rest of the NPCs. And on top of that, a lot of those kind of the remastered 3D models, they don't really capture the style of like this. So for instance, like Squall, the remaster version of Squall,
right,
looks he looks kind of younger and more like baby face-ish than the original model, right? And so there's a kind of a shifting trend in aesthetic and stuff like that worms itself into these remasters, where it's like, this is pixelated, so it could basically look like anything they tell themselves, and then they go, today people like this kind of look, and then they change them. And I don't know, the new Squall to me, as ugly as the like jittery pixely version,
best looking guy here,
the best looking guy here version of Squall is, at least he had a bit of an edgy air to him, which vibes with his personality. But now he's this kind of, he looks like Shulk from the freaking Xenoblade remaster, right? And he has like a face that he looks like he's 14 years old, and he has a very kind of nice looking face. And I'm like, this doesn't suit the character, because he's supposed to be a bit of like a sour, grumpy kind of old man for his age type of teenager, right? And this aesthetic just doesn't kind of mesh well with him at all.
Well, and
that's what I mean. Like,
on that point, they've done similar things with the other characters, which I think is what you're getting at. Because if you look at the new cover for Final Fantasy X, you can see Titus and Yuna's face, and it looks perfectly fine. It's well done. But compared to the original model, they've clearly made them look younger. And it is a weird choice. But in regards to Squall and FF8, stylistically, I agree. It doesn't match what I envisioned when I was a kid. It depends on how you look at it, because I'll acknowledge when I was a kid, I thought Squall was in his 20s, right? And but per the manual book, he's like 17. So you could make an argument that the newer versions are more in line with the actual lore, but I don't think the way he carries himself most of the time doesn't feel like a 17-year-old. So I can definitely see where there'd be some conflict with them updating this.
Yeah. And that's also kind of like a cultural thing, because when I went in high school, a lot of the guys, I say guys, right? The boys in my class and stuff like that, when I was 17, 18, had full fucking facial hair, right? So I don't know if that's like a Norwegian thing where, because of the cold or whatever, we just get pumped full of testosterone or whatever. But like, Norwegians age really fucking quickly. We get furrowed face. Like, I've had this face since I was 16, more or less.
Jesus. No, I'm just
unfortunately.
kidding.
But like basically. So but it's basically, it hasn't changed all that much. And I'm past 30 now, which is crazy, right?
Yeah.
But so either I looked really old when I was still young, or it means that I still look young. I don't know. I don't want to think too much about that, to be honest. It makes me uncomfortable. But it's like I had peeps in my class at 17 who had full fucking facial hair, right? And they could walk into a supermarket and buy beer because nobody would think that they were younger than 18 or whatever. So I look at like babyface Squall and I'm like, no way in hell is this guy 17, right? Or like he looks like he's 12, right? But again, that's a cultural thing. So you're here in Japan, for instance, people who are 17 look like they're 12, and people who are 30 look like they're 18. So Yeah. I don't know, but for me personally, at least, I thought Squall looked to be in like his design in the original game was in the right wheelhouse, and then they went like kind of messed with it. And
Yeah, I agree.
I don't like what Sedaine looks like in Final Fantasy 9 either on Steam or whatever, and I don't look like what they're doing with the character designs in like the Android remake version of Final Fantasy 7 either. So it's just, why can't they just like update things and keep it the same? Why do they have to
tweak it?
Start knitting with tweak the aesthetics? This is not necessary. Just don't touch the aesthetics. The aesthetics were just fine.
Yeah, I agree, man. There's a reason why these games are cherished and people still enjoy them today. Yeah. And it's very difficult to create a new IP or a new game or a new RPG and have it have the lasting power of these games. That's unique. That's rare. That's not commonplace. And so it's kind of pretentious to think that you can go back and take something that's been cherished through time and then make it something new. Because why?
Sure.
Because if you were to make a new game in that new aesthetic, it may not have that same appeal. So it is definitely a little interesting, but at least with the pixel remasters that we've had with Final Fantasy 1 through 3, I think the updates are very tame. I mean, they're very tactfully done. I do like
they're conservative.
Yeah, I like them. They're authentic to the original vision without getting too excessive, and I like it a lot. Yeah. I just am a little bit more concerned with Final Fantasy 4 through 6, but I do think that, like you pointed out, the soundtracks for those games are just going to be magnificent, and it's just going to help me get over the hump of anything I feel they jacked up.
Yeah. It's just such a true thing for art that I feel as if people don't talk a lot about, where it's kind of, it's kind of that IGN review mindset where it's like, here I'm reviewing the graphics, here I'm reviewing the soundtrack, here I'm reviewing the gameplay. But that's not how games work, because you don't sit there in a vacuum and listen to the music for 5 minutes, and then you look at the visuals for 5 minutes, and then you play the game for 5 minutes. You get the visuals and the music and the gameplay together in a single package. Like it's an accumulation of all those different things that you experience on a moment-to-moment basis. And so when you have a really good soundtrack, it can elevate an otherwise really bad story moment, right? I think that's true. I think there are times, like for instance, when I was a kid and Aerith died, and I bawled my eyes out at that because I thought it was super fucking sad, right?
It is
probably 50%. Yeah, probably 50% of that is the music, right? When the materia drops and the Aerith theme kicks in, and then they've masterfully kind of planted the seeds for that through the entire game by using Aerith's theme at different points throughout the game and stuff like that. And then the materia hits the step on and then the music kicks in with the piano, right? The reason that hurts, right, isn't just because like, well, the plot is this or this is this. It's because of all of those things like coming together in the moment, right? And that's why it's impactful. And so I don't like when people get kind of too hyper focused on a single detail to the point that they fail to kind of see the broader picture of what's actually occurring when they're engaging with a game, right? And I feel it's kind of like this with these pixel remasters, because like you can look at some screenshots of that and I don't really like this pixel art or whatever, but I would argue that what the music adds to the moment-to-moment gameplay and story in these games is actually so big that even those kind of small gripes that I have with the pixel art kind of just, but this is for me personally because I care a lot about music, but I mean, it just kind of melts away, because what I'm seeing when I'm hearing that music, when that hits me in the face, is that I'm not really seeing the little things that I don't care about in the pixel art. What I'm seeing is, oh, this is Final Fantasy 1. I'm standing on the freaking bridge and, there's the silhouette of the characters and the main theme is just like, oh, hitting me in the face. And I'm just going, oh, yes, this is
nostalgia.
This is it.
Yeah.
This is Final Fantasy, right? And at that point, it seizes the matter, because of the cumulative effect of that. And I just don't think you can underestimate the power of that. I even with some of those things that we saw from the screenshot of Final Fantasy 6, when the mode 7 kicks in and the mechs are walking through the snow, if Remaster came through on that track and that track drops, I'm gonna be my third eye is gonna be somewhere over here, right? And everything's just gonna come back.
Yeah, it's gonna be
It's
fantastic.
gonna feel like you're 10 again. Yeah. It's gonna be great. So yeah, it just can't be overstated.
Yeah, I totally agree. And look, the originals are all out there. You can go play them. And I have to be honest, the originals, while they're great for their time, they're very classic. Sometimes I still like playing them. The originals have issues,
Sure.
Final Fantasy 2 is broken. You can still break it in this version, but they've fixed some issues with it in this version. Final Fantasy 1 doesn't have auto target, so they wanted you to track the HP of each enemy and kind of mentally tally if you were going to be able to kill it in 1 or 2 hits. And there's certain things like that, and it's just slow in between battles. So I can give a little bit of a pass for small details. So I totally agree.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, all in all, I think I would recommend them. If you're a fan of Final Fantasies, early Final Fantasies, absolutely check it out. You could try to check out the soundtrack, but I've noticed Square's been pulling the soundtrack on YouTube pretty quickly. So that's because they're selling the soundtrack separately, so I'm sure eventually that's going to go away because Square's only going to have so much time to file copyright strikes on soundtracks uploaded to YouTube.
It's okay. There's this technique called typing the name of a soundtrack into the Google search bar and then typing RAR behind it, and then you can.
This technique
it shows up immediately.
This technique is frowned upon, but that is a technique that can be done. So, but anyways, yeah, I would just say go buy the game though. I mean, you can get the soundtracks that way too. So definitely check that out. Yeah, what's up?
That's worth mentioning. I didn't know this. It was totally by accident, but I think all the 3 games have like the art booklets in the menu where you can see all of Amano's art in like freaking HD. The concept art for every game. That's priceless, dude. Have you tried finding Amano art in HD on Google? It's freaking hard, man. Some of those pictures are total shit. They're low resolution crap fucking like shit. So having access to that art, if you're an Amano fan, that's that kind of with the music and with that art, I'd gladly pay like 1,500 yen for an art booklet for the Final Fantasy art and a remaster soundtrack. So I'm gonna sort of change my opinion here, given that I'd probably pay that price just for a remastered soundtrack and the art. Maybe it's not so bad. Maybe the game's just like a tag-along kind of thing. You get the art and you get the music, and then you also get the game. That's great.
That's interesting because I think a lot of people are going to look at it as the opposite. You pay the money, you get the game, and then the art book and the music are a tag-along. But that's a good point. There's not a lot of HD images of Amano's work, and then also you get that soundtrack. So I haven't checked this. I haven't checked the art book out. I did get it, but I haven't done that. Now that you've got me hyped about it, I just figured it was some like generic recreation or something like that. So that's very cool.
It's the classic, like it's just concept art, but it's worth mentioning, right? Because like, how much do you think those soundtracks are going to cost, right? One of if you buy them separately, just the soundtracks as CDs, right?
yeah, exactly.
They're not gonna be 1,500 yen. I can tell you that they're gonna be 3,000. They're gonna be twice the price. It's gonna be more expensive to buy the freaking CDs than it's gonna be buying the games, probably.
Yeah. So, the price isn't bad. The only, I guess, the last point I'd just bring up is just, I pay in here $74.99 for the Final Fantasy 1 through 6, which is going to be the cheapest option. Get all that bonus content, which is cool. But I mean, Square's not fooling anybody. They're gonna put these out on console. There's probably gonna be a physical version at some point, I would imagine, and I'm gonna feel compelled to own that physical version. And I already bought these digitally, so it's going to make me feel really bad, when I see that, because I'm like, if I just had discipline and I waited, but it's okay. Yeah. It's okay. It is what it is.
It is what it is.
Yeah.
We'll forgive Square Enix for today.
Yeah. Just for today, though.
For today.
Speaking of things better than Square Enix currently, hey, thanks for sticking around till the end. If you enjoyed this content, be sure to hit that subscribe button. And also, check out our audio version. It's on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and practically any podcatcher you can think of. Also, we have a fantastic media partner at RPGFan.com. Be sure to go check them out for your latest RPG reviews and news, as well as some other kick-ass podcasts with Rhythm Encounter, Retro Encounter, and Random Encounter. Go check them out. We'll see you next time.